Your brother's fiancé needs your chair. My father said it like he was asking me to pass the salt. I stood behind my place at the Christmas table with my coat still damp from the snow, watching him lift my plate, my fork, even the folded red napkin I had set there 20 minutes earlier. Dad, I said quietly, I can just grab another chair. No, Richard Wallace didn't look at me. The table's crowded enough, don't make this dramatic. Across from him, my brother Daniel stared into his wineglass. Mom suddenly became fascinated with straightening the candles, and Daniel's fiancé, Marcus, stood frozen near the doorway, his polite smile slipping as he realized the empty seat my father was making room for was mine. Then Dad carried my dinner through the kitchen and into the garage. He set it on an old card table beside Mom's storage shelves, between plastic Christmas bins, canned tomatoes, and a broken wreath with half its lights dead. There, he said, you'll be fine. The garage was cold enough that my breath showed when I sat down. Through the door, I could hear the dining room laughing in little bursts, forks tapping plates, Daniel saying something that made Mom giggle too loudly. I stared at my turkey, already cooling, and tried not to think about the pies I had baked that morning sitting on their counter. I had paid for Mom's prescriptions that spring when Dad said money was tight. I had taken Grandma Helen to her appointments for 2 years when everyone else was busy. I had slept in hospital chairs, filled pill organizers, and held her hand when she was too weak to lift a cup. But on Christmas night, a man who had never eaten with us before got my chair. Then, through the cracked kitchen door, I heard Dad's voice lower. Once Helen's estate is settled, things will finally be where they belong. Mom hissed, Richard, not at dinner. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Grandma Helen had been dead 3 months. Nobody had told me there was anything to settle. I waited until my plate was empty because leaving food behind would somehow become another crime. Then I carried it back inside. The second I stepped under the dining room light, Marcus looked up. His face changed. The glass slipped from his hand and exploded across the hardwood. Dad turned sharply. Wait, do you two know each? But Marcus was already reaching for his coat. Marcus's fingers fumbled with the sleeve of his coat, like he suddenly couldn't remember how fabric worked. Marcus, Daniel stood so fast his chair scraped backward. What are you doing? I'm sorry, Marcus said. His voice was thin. I don't feel well. Nobody moved toward the broken glass. Nobody moved toward me either. Dad's eyes snapped from Marcus to me, and the room shifted the way it always did in my family. Whatever had gone wrong had somehow become my fault. What did you do? He asked. I blinked. What? To him, Dad pointed toward Marcus, then toward me. Why is he looking at you like that? I've never met him before tonight. Marcus didn't answer quickly enough. That half-second silence hit the table harder than the glass had. Mom grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward the kitchen. Jennifer, come here. She closed the door halfway behind us, leaving just enough space for the dining room voices to leak through. Don't start, she whispered. I'm not starting anything. Daniel has finally found someone decent, someone stable, someone from a good family. Her grip tightened. Do not embarrass him because your feelings are hurt. I looked at her hand on my wrist. Dad sent me to eat Christmas dinner in the garage. And he shouldn't have, she said quickly, without meaning it enough to go back out there and say it to him. But your father is under pressure. Your grandmother's death left complications. What complications? Mom's mouth closed. What complications? I asked again. That is not your concern. For a second, the kitchen blurred around the edges. Not my concern. Grandma Helen's calendar had been my concern. Her chemo nausea had been my concern. Her pharmacy calls, her grocery lists, her shaking hands, her last Christmas card to me that said, You are the only one who still comes without wanting something. From the dining room, Daniel's voice rose. Marcus, please, just talk to me. Then Marcus said, clear enough for all of us to hear, I can't be here, not if she's here. I pulled my wrist free and stepped back into the doorway. Dad turned on me instantly. Tell us exactly how you know my son's fiancée. I told you, I said, I don't. Marcus had his coat on now. His face was pale, but his eyes were fixed on Dad. Then he looked at me once, like he wanted to apologize and warn me at the same time. Ask your lawyer, Marcus said. What name is on Helen Wallace's file? And then he walked out. The front door slammed open so hard the wreath bounced against it. Marcus, Daniel shouted, rushing after him into the snow. Wait! Dad followed, red-faced and furious, but Marcus was already halfway down the walkway. The cold poured into the dining room, cutting through the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon. Across the street, Mrs. Alvarez stepped onto her porch in a bathrobe, staring at our house while Christmas music still played behind us like nothing had happened. Get back inside, Dad barked at me as if I had chased anyone out. But I didn't move. Marcus's car pulled away from the curb, tires crunching over ice. Daniel stood in the driveway with his hands on his head, staring after the taillights until they disappeared. Dad came back in first and forced a laugh that sounded broken. Well, that was strange. He must have confused Jennifer with someone from work. Mom dropped to her knees and began picking up glass with a napkin. Everyone just sit down, please. I looked at Dad. What did he mean by Helen Wallace's file? His face hardened. Estate matters are private. Private from who? From people who have no reason to be involved. The words landed in the room, and for the first time that night someone else pushed back. Aunt Carol set down her wineglass. Richard, how does Jennifer have no reason to be involved? She was the one driving Helen to every appointment. Dad didn't even look at her. Caregiving doesn't equal inheritance. The table went quiet. There it was. Not grief, not family, inheritance. Daniel stepped back inside, snow on his shoes and panic in his voice. Dad, you told me the house and savings were staying where they belonged. I turned toward him. You've all been talking about Grandma Helen's money. Mom whispered, Jennifer. No, my voice came out sharper than I expected. I was in the garage while you were discussing the estate of the woman I took care of. Nobody answered. Then Daniel's phone rang. He looked down, jaw tight, and answered without checking the speaker setting. Marcus's voice filled the dining room. Daniel, listen to me. Do not let your father destroy anything from Helen's office. The will was already filed. Dad went completely still. My eyes moved past him, down the hallway, to the stack of Grandma Helen's old boxes beneath the stairs. Dad reached the hallway before anyone else could breathe. Richard, Mom said, but she didn't move fast enough to stop him. He crouched under the staircase and yanked the first cardboard box open. Old papers shifted. File folders slapped against the floor. His hands moved too quickly, tearing through Grandma Helen's things like they were obstacles instead of the last pieces of her life. Stop, I said. Dad didn't look up. Stay out of this. I stepped closer and saw a folder slide loose from the box. Home care receipts, Jennifer. My name was written in Grandma Helen's careful handwriting. Inside were copies of pharmacy checks, appointment schedules, mileage notes, and folded letters paper-clipped together. She had saved everything, every ride, every prescription. Every day I had shown up when Dad said he had meetings and Daniel said hospitals made him uncomfortable. Dad saw me looking and snatched a sealed envelope from the bottom of the box. What is that? I asked. Family property. She was my family too. He shoved the envelope under his arm and tried to step around me. I moved in front of the hall door. For once my body answered before my fear did. Dad's jaw tightened. Jennifer, move. No. Daniel stood behind him silent, but his face had changed. Mom pressed both hands to her mouth. Aunt Carol pulled out her phone and held it up. Nobody touches another thing until the lawyer is called. Dad turned on her. Put that away. No, Aunt Carol said. I should have taken it out when you sent her plate to the garage. My hands shook as I searched the law firm Marcus had mentioned. I called the number. When the answering service picked up, I said Helen Wallace's name, then mine. A pause. Then the operator said, Ms. Wallace, please hold. The on-call attorney has already been notified. Already? When the attorney came on, his voice was controlled but firm. Ms. Wallace, bring identification to our office tomorrow morning. Until then, no one is to remove any documents from Mrs. Wallace's boxes. Dad's face drained. Mom whispered, "Richard, what did Helen do?" Before he could answer, Daniel's phone buzzed. He read the message, then looked at me like the ground had moved under all of us. "Dad," he said, "why does Marcus say she owns the house?" The next morning, I walked into the attorney's office wearing the same black coat I had grabbed on my way out of my parents' house. Nobody said Merry Christmas. Dad sat stiffly beside Mom, one hand clenched around the arm of his chair. Daniel sat beside them with his elbows on his knees, staring at the carpet. Aunt Carol stood near the window. Marcus was there too, pale and exhausted, his coat folded over his lap like he had not slept. The attorney, Mr. Bennett, closed the conference room door. Before he could speak, Marcus stood. "Jennifer," he said, "I owe you an explanation." Dad snapped, "You don't owe her anything." Mr. Bennett looked at him. "Richard, sit down." Dad sat. Marcus swallowed. "I'm a junior associate here. I worked on parts of Helen Wallace's estate file. I had never met you in person, but I saw your name everywhere. Medical proxy forms, caregiving notes, reimbursement records, copies of your ID attached to the documents." He looked down at his hands. "When you came back from the garage last night, I recognized your face from the file, and I realized Daniel's family had just humiliated the person Helen chose." The room went silent. Mr. Bennett opened a folder and laid the will on the table. "Helen Wallace updated her estate plan 8 months before her death," he said. "She was evaluated, she was competent, the will was witnessed and properly filed." Dad's voice came out rough. Helen was confused. "She was not," Mr. Bennett said. Then he read the part that made Mom cover her mouth. "Helen had left the house, her savings, her investments, and her personal belongings to me, solely to me. Not to Dad, not to Daniel, not divided among the family. Me." Mr. Bennett unfolded a letter in Grandma Helen's handwriting. "Jennifer came when no one else did," he read. "She never asked what she would get. She protected my dignity when illness tried to take it. I want my home to belong to the person who made it feel like one." Daniel shut his eyes. Mom started crying quietly. Dad leaned forward. "That house belongs in this family." Mr. Bennett looked directly at him. "It is in this family. It belongs to Jennifer." Dad's face twisted. "I was her son." "And last night," Mr. Bennett said, "you attempted to remove a sealed document from her boxes after being warned not to. That has been noted. If you contest this will using false claims or mishandled documents, you may be responsible for legal costs and sanctions." For the first time in my life, Dad had nothing to say. The fallout didn't wait. By New Year's, Aunt Carol had told the relatives exactly what happened. The garage dinner, the estate talk, the envelope under Dad's arm. People who had watched Dad dominate every holiday suddenly stopped answering his calls. Cousins sent me messages I didn't know how to read at first because they sounded like apologies. Marcus ended the engagement. Daniel called me 2 days later, voice hollow, and said, "He left." I didn't ask him to explain. But he did anyway. He said he couldn't marry into a family that treats cruelty like tradition. Daniel paused, and he asked if I knew Dad planned to pressure you. I waited. Daniel whispered, "I did." That was the last honest thing he gave me for a long time. Dad got nothing from Helen's estate. Mom lost the future she had already been decorating in her head. Daniel lost the inheritance he had expected and the man he had brought home to impress them. I changed the locks on Grandma Helen's house the same week the paperwork cleared. I hired an estate accountant. I placed her letters in a small wooden box on the mantel, beside the photo of us from her last birthday, where she was wearing a paper crown and laughing with her whole face. I didn't move in right away. First I cleaned. Not because the house needed it, but because I wanted to touch every room without hearing Dad's voice in my head telling me where I did and didn't belong. Then one evening, I set one plate at the dining room table. I lit one candle. I warmed a slice of the pie I never got to eat on Christmas and sat down in Grandma Helen's chair. The house was quiet. Warmth. Minds. Months later, Dad called. "We should put Christmas behind us," he said, as if Christmas had been a misunderstanding and not the night he carried my dinner into a garage. I looked around the home Grandma Helen had trusted me with. I did, I said, that's why you're not welcome here. Then I hung up. And for the first time in my life, I sat at a table that had room for me. I never ate in the garage again,